"I want to buy a dad," the black girl whispered, eyes wide, hands trembling with a few crumpled bills. Big Shaq laughed, until he realized she wasn't joking. Behind that innocent voice was a truth too heavy for a child. A dead mother, a life shaped by absence, and a question no adult could answer. That day, it wasn't about money. It was about longing, grief, and a broken system no one dared to name. And in that moment, the richest man in the room couldn't afford to look away. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. What kind of child puts a price on love? The sun was warm that Saturday afternoon, hanging heavy over a small patch of Georgia earth that had grown used to silence. But this day buzzed with energy. Smoke rose from grills lined up under a pop-up tent, the scent of charred hot dogs mixing with sweet corn and coleslaw. Shaquille O'Neal, retired legend, millionaire and known around these parts simply as Big Shaq, stood at the edge of a dirt path, his massive hands flipping burgers while kids played hopscotch near the shelter's steps. This wasn't charity for show. Shaq had built this space himself, invested money, time, and sweat into the bones of this place because he believed in something bigger than basketball. He believed in second chances, in love rediscovered, in dignity returned. It was then, amid the laughter and summer haze, that the noise fell into a quiet ripple. She was small, rail-thin, and alone, no hand to hold, no shoes on her feet. Her hair was matted into uneven braids, and her eyes, dark, urgent, held something older than her frame could explain. Shaq noticed her before anyone else did. He saw her hesitation, the way she didn't so much walk toward the grill as she did aim herself at it, like someone leaping into traffic. The food was free, the fun was open, but she hadn't come for any of that. When she reached him, she stood silent for a moment. He lowered the spatula. She looked up, eyes fixed, unblinking. "I want to buy a dad," she said. It wasn't loud, but it cut through the air like a lightning crack. The conversation around them dimmed. Someone dropped a paper plate. A child's giggle stopped midstream. The sentence was too sharp, too honest to be processed immediately. Shaq crouched slightly, meeting her at eye level. He said nothing, only blinked, absorbing the weight of the words. He didn't laugh. He didn't kneel or reach out. He simply waited. "My name's Zariah," she added, clutching something against her chest. It was a Ziploc bag, filled with coins, folded bills, and 2 candy wrappers for padding. "I've been saving." The coins clinked when she shook it, like a lullaby made from desperation. He gently led her to a bench under the old oak tree, away from the frozen eyes and confused whispers. The picnic carried on, awkwardly, like a car trying to restart after a stall, but Shaq's focus never left her. Zariah explained, in fragments. Her voice had the edges of someone who'd had to defend herself without words for too long. She'd been in the foster system since she was 5. Her mother, Tamira, died in an apartment fire. Her father, no one ever mentioned him. No one wanted to. In 5 years, she'd been in 8 homes, all white, all temporary. Some lasted weeks. One lasted 4 days. "I keep money in my shoe," she said quietly. "So if I have to leave again, I can start over." Shaq didn't ask why she thought money could buy her a dad. He understood it wasn't about the dollars. It was about worth. Zariah believed love cost something because it was always denied her for free. When the sun began to lower, he made a call to his friend Donya, a social worker he'd worked with on housing projects. They arranged to keep Zariah overnight in the guest shelter while proper care was coordinated. She agreed only when Shaq promised he'd visit her first thing in the morning. That night he didn't sleep. Zariah's words haunted him. They played on loop in his mind, clashing with old echoes he hadn't faced in years, of his own absent father, of his mother's quiet tears, of nights he cried without sound, so no one would hear. He thought he'd built enough walls around those memories, but Zariah had knocked them down with a single sentence. The next morning he returned with a breakfast sandwich in one hand, and a notepad in the other. She was already sitting on the porch, eyes narrowed, suspicious he might not show. But when she saw him, something unspoken cracked ever so slightly in her gaze. Not quite trust, but the absence of fear. They ate in silence. Then Shaq asked if she'd ever seen a real basketball court. She hadn't. So he took her to the local gym, not to teach her basketball, but to let her see the world from a different height. He hoisted her up, let her dunk once, and her laughter pealed out in an awkward, choked burst, as if it surprised her too. That same afternoon, he pulled Danya aside. He wanted details. Every home, every report, every rejection. She's been labeled defiant, Donya told him. Hard to bond with. Sometimes, disruptive. Shaq frowned. You know what I hear when they say that?
What?
I hear. She don't act grateful to be abandoned again. Donya nodded. It's worse than that. One foster mother said she made her uncomfortable, just by being there. That she didn't mesh with the culture of the home. Shaq's jaw tightened. That wasn't behavior. That was racism, written in bureaucratic ink. He started to visit Zariah daily. Brought books, asked about her dreams, discovered she loved drawing, especially sketches of homes, cozy crooked cottages, with warm lights inside. On the fourth day she handed him a drawing. 2 stick figures, one tall with a bald head, one small with braids. Above them, in looping crayon, she'd written safe. You think that's me? He asked, gently. She shrugged. If it's not, it's nobody. Shaq took that paper home and pinned it above his bed. He'd been rich for decades, famous for longer. But this was the first time he felt someone needed him without ever seeing a highlight reel. By the end of the week she'd started talking more. Not about her trauma. Zariah wasn't built for pity, but about her questions. Do real dads leave? Can dads be born late? Can someone be yours if they don't live in your house? Shaq answered only when he had answers. When he didn't, he let the silence hold space for truth. And then one night, Zariah pulled a crumpled letter from her backpack. She hesitated before handing it over. It's from someone named Ronan, she said. He said he might be my dad, but I don't know. Shaq opened it carefully. The paper was old, the handwriting shaky. It was written in blue ink and filled with misspelled words, but every line screamed devotion. I draw you every day. Even if they say I can't see you, I will believe you. Smile. Roman Delaney, inmate Den 48219, Georgia State Penitentiary. Shaq looked up, his mind swirling. Zariah's plea was never just a cry for a father. It was a map leading back to someone buried in shadows. And for the first time in years, Big Shaq felt something shift inside. This wasn't just a moment of kindness. It was the beginning of something deeper, something dangerous, something real. And he wasn't walking away. Certainly. Here's the 1,200-word script for the second section. What if you felt the weight of a fatherless child's wish on your chest? The morning after Zariah's words sank into his chest like an anchor. Shaquille O'Neal sat alone at the kitchen table in his Georgia home. The house was quiet, too quiet for a man used to noise. The steady rhythm of his mother's prayers, the hum of locker room chatter, the screaming fans. But now it was just him and the echo of a sentence that had cracked something wide open inside. I want to buy a dad. He couldn't stop replaying it. Not just the words themselves, but the tone. How matter-of-fact she'd said it. Like someone ordering fries at a drive-thru. She hadn't said it with sadness. She'd said it with clarity, certainty. That's what rattled him most. Shaq had long buried the ache of his own absent father. It was like a sealed vault inside him. Something he never let others see. He'd learned to be a man without that guidance. His mother, Lucille, had raised him like a warrior. Strong, self-sufficient, tender only in private. But Zariah's voice had unlatched the vault. All at once, the memories returned. Nights of lying awake, wondering where his father was. Wondering if he even cared. Wondering if the hole in his heart had a name. He had filled that void with discipline, sports, and later wealth. But no amount of rings or records could shield him from a child's cry that mirrored his own. That morning, he called Danya again. I want everything on Zariah. Every placement, every report, every home. Don't sugarcoat it. Within hours he sat in a makeshift office in the shelter, surrounded by boxes of foster records, CPS documents, and printed incident reports. He pored over every word, his fingers trembling slightly, not with fear but with something colder, rage. 8 homes in 5 years. All white. All temporary. The notes repeated the same phrases. Behavioral issues, disrespectful tone, trouble integrating. But as Shaq read further, he noticed something chilling. Zariah's defiance was often tied to cultural disconnects. One home wrote that she refused to straighten her hair. Another documented that she challenged a family's views on Black Lives Matter. A third listed her as disruptive for questioning why only white dolls were given to her on Christmas. None of this screamed problematic child. It screamed a child drowning in a system blind to its own bias. He highlighted patterns, circled contradictions. The more he read, the more a silent storm built inside him. These weren't just failed placements. They were subtle, institutionalized betrayals. Zariah hadn't been difficult. She had been resisting assimilation. In the fifth report he found a note that stopped him cold. Zariah tends to form inappropriate attachments to adult males. That was all it said. No context. No explanation. Just a red flag line that, to Shaq, reeked of suspicion without substance. He slammed the file shut. His breathing shallow. Was that why no one believed her? Was that the excuse they gave themselves to avoid loving her? Donya entered quietly, placing a cup of coffee beside him. You see it now, she said, not as a question but a confirmation. I see it, he said slowly, and I hate it. She nodded. They write these reports as if they're facts, but most of it is coded language. Zariah challenges white comfort, and that makes her dangerous. Shaq sat back, fingers laced, the storm now thundering behind his calm. He started making calls. He reached out to former foster parents, posing as a concerned benefactor. He didn't reveal his name at first, just asked about Zariah. Some were polite. Others stumbled into racist microaggressions so casually that it made his jaw tighten. Well, she was intense, said one. She didn't act grateful, said another. One man told him, she just didn't fit with our lifestyle. We're not used to those kinds of cultural differences. Shaq kept his voice even. You mean black culture? There was a pause. Then, well, yes. By the third call, he stopped pretending to be neutral. He used his full name, and the tone shifted instantly. Apologies. Flattery. Defensive stammering. He hung up, disgusted. That night, he sat alone again, but this time on the bench under the oak tree, where he'd first met Zariah. The same bench where her voice had sliced through the air and changed him. He stared out at the empty court beyond the shelter, the moonlight spilling across the pavement like spilled milk. He pulled out the letter she'd shown him. Roman Delaney's shaky words on crumpled paper. Something about the letter bothered him. It wasn't just the emotional weight. It was the fact that this man had tried to reach her, and no one had told her. Why? Why hide that? He made another call, this time to a contact in corrections, who owed him a favor. Roman Delaney. Inmate. Georgia State Penitentiary. Get me his file. Within the hour, he had it. Roman was serving life for armed robbery. No priors before that. Conviction at 22. Black male. Worked at a tire shop. Never had a lawyer who fought for him. No appeal, no family visits. In over a decade. Except one rejected visitor request listed as Zariah Tamira Wells. Denied. Denied. Shaq leaned forward, heart pounding. The system hadn't just failed her. It had erased her, sanitized her story, stripped her of origin, context, and connection. What remained was a paper-thin profile of a troubled black child. He looked up at the stars, wondering how many other children were floating in the dark like Zariah, praying for a dad like she was ordering takeout. The next day, he asked Zariah if she'd ever heard the name Roman Delaney. She shook her head slowly. Is he dead? No, Shaq said gently. But someone made sure you thought he might be. She studied his face, trying to find the trap. Why? I think, Shaq said carefully, someone decided your story was easier to handle without him in it. Zariah didn't respond, but her eyes glistened, not with tears, but with fury. Later that evening, as Shaq reviewed more of her files, he noticed that every transition between homes happened right after a report was filed by the foster parents. None were from school staff or counselors. Only foster families. And every move placed her further from diversity. Less exposure to black culture. Less comfort. Less connection. It was as if someone wanted her surrounded by sameness. Controlled. Diluted. He thought of the phrase from one of the earlier calls. She didn't fit our lifestyle. But Zariah didn't fit because she wasn't supposed to shrink. She wasn't meant to be a quiet doll placed on a shelf to appease white saviors. She was meant to live, to stretch, to question. Shaq stood in front of the shelter's mirror later that night and stared at himself. He was a 7'1" man built like a fortress, but right now he felt like a cracked window in a hurricane. Because Zariah wasn't just asking him for love. She was asking him to be a witness to all she'd lost. All that had been taken. All that had been hidden. And Shaq, for the first time in years, felt afraid, not of failure, but of silence. Because silence had buried Roman. It had shuffled Zariah through a revolving door of rejection, and it had cloaked systemic racism in the soft language of incompatibility. But he wouldn't be silent anymore. The storm inside him wasn't just grief. It was purpose. Tomorrow he would begin digging deeper. And someone somewhere was going to answer for what they did to Zariah. Certainly. Here's the 1,200-word script for the third section. Why do some homes never become safe havens? The neighborhood looked like something from a real estate brochure. Fresh asphalt roads, manicured lawns, white mailboxes lined up like teeth along the sidewalk. Every house had a flagpole, a dog, and a porch swing. But Shaquille O'Neal had learned long ago that what glitters in daylight can rot in shadow. He parked his SUV 2 houses down from the address he was given, and sat quietly, letting the stillness speak. Zariah's file said she'd stayed here for 6 weeks, her longest placement. The official records noted behavioral conflicts and incompatibility with house rules. No incident report, no counseling follow-up, just the soft clinical words that usually follow a system more concerned with appearance than truth. He stepped out of the car, drawing looks before he even hit the walkway. A man of his size and stature couldn't go unnoticed. Not in a place like this. A woman across the street paused mid-sip from her mug. A jogger slowed, then picked up pace. Shaq didn't flinch. He was used to eyes. What he wasn't used to, what still made his blood tighten, was the silent judgment hidden behind those eyes when you were black in a white-painted world. He rang the bell. The door opened with the kind of precise swiftness that suggested she'd been watching from the window. "Hello, can I help you?" she asked, already stepping halfway outside, clutching the door like it was a leash on a restless dog. "Mrs. Pennington?" Shaq asked. "Yes." He introduced himself not with fame or fanfare, just a firm handshake and a quiet explanation. "I'm involved with a community program that's recently come across the case of a child you once fostered. Zariah Wells. I'm trying to understand what happened." Mrs. Pennington's eyes flickered. She smiled, but it didn't touch her cheeks. "Oh, yes. Zariah. That was quite some time ago. May I come in?" There was hesitation, a flash of calculation. Then she stepped aside. The inside of the house was pristine. Air freshener hung thick in the air, and every cushion was perfectly centered. Family photos lined the hallway. Smiling white faces, church portraits, holiday candids. No trace of Zariah, not even in the background. They sat in the living room, a room too stiff for comfort. She offered tea. He declined. "I remember her," Mrs. Pennington began, folding her hands tightly in her lap. "Very bright, very spirited." Shaq waited, letting the silence stretch. "But she struggled here," she continued. "She wasn't a good fit." "In what way?" "Well, she had trouble with boundaries, rules. She didn't respond well to structure. She questioned everything." Shaq raised an eyebrow. "Isn't that normal for kids her age?" Mrs. Pennington's lips thinned. "Perhaps. But she also had a bit of an attitude. She'd challenge my husband, push back on simple things, and she was very sensitive." "Sensitive?" "Yes. Once we asked her to change out of a t-shirt that had a slogan we found inappropriate. She refused. Said it was about her culture, but it was just a shirt with raised fists and protests. Not something we felt was respectful in our home." Shaq leaned forward slightly. "Did you ever ask her what it meant to her?" She paused. "We didn't feel it was our place to debate politics with a child." Shaq's jaw tightened. "So it was political. To her it might have been personal." Mrs. Pennington shifted. "We tried our best, Mr. O'Neal, but Zariah made it difficult. She'd say things like, 'You don't understand black girls.' I mean, how is someone supposed to respond to that?" "Maybe by listening," he said calmly. She bristled. "I don't think you're being fair. We took her in when no one else would." "That's exactly why I'm here," Shaq replied, his voice steady. "Because sometimes people take children in for the wrong reasons. To feel good about themselves. To decorate their virtue with charity." Her face reddened. "Excuse me?" He stood slowly. "Where did she sleep?" Mrs. Pennington blinked. "In the guest room. We had it all set up. A nice pink bedspread. Stuffed animals." Shaq walked toward the hallway. "Can I see it?" "Sir, I don't think." But he was already moving. The room was there, second on the left. It was neat, immaculate, but impersonal. No signs of life. No posters, No scribbled notes on a dresser. No fingerprints of a child who had made it her own. He turned back. How long did she stay here before you called CPS? Mrs. Pennington hesitated. We didn't call them. We just informed them it wasn't working out. And they moved her? Yes. Shaq nodded slowly. Was she ever violent? Did she hurt anyone? Of course not, she said, clearly offended. Did she break anything? No. Then what did she do, Mrs. Pennington? The woman opened her mouth, closed it, then sighed. She made us uncomfortable. There it was. Shaq walked out without another word. The door closed behind him, sharp as a gavel. As he drove back, his hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than he realized. He wasn't angry in the usual sense. He was sick. Sick of how polite racism wore pearls, and smiled while it erased black children from belonging. Sick of how uncomfortable was enough reason to eject a girl from a home. Sick of how white walls were painted with good intentions, while scars stayed hidden beneath Zariah's skin. He stopped at a red light and looked up at the clouds, thick and bruising above the tree line. The sky mirrored his thoughts, heavy, swelling, on the edge of rupture. He thought of Zariah, quiet and guarded, building defenses that no child should have to build. She hadn't been kicked out because she was trouble. She'd been cast aside because she reminded them of something they didn't want to face. Shaq returned to the shelter and found her sketching in the corner. She looked up, eyes searching. How was the lady? She asked, surprising him. You remember her? Zariah shrugged. I remember how she cleaned everything twice a day, like she was scared I'd leave a mark. He knelt beside her. She said you had an attitude. She snorted softly. Only when they told me I couldn't wear my hair natural. Said it looked unprofessional. I was 8. Shaq sat with her in silence. I used to talk to the teddy bear in that house. She said quietly. Named it Marcus. Only thing that listened. Shaq took a slow breath. You ever want to go back there? Nope, she said. But I do want her to know I still wear my fro. Bigger now. He smiled, a small, bitter smile. Good. That night, Shaq took all the documents, all the notes, and began compiling a record. Not just of homes failed, but of scars hidden. White walls meant nothing if the love inside was conditional. Zariah didn't need another temporary address. She needed permanence, respect, freedom to exist without apology. And she wasn't the only one. There were more Zariahs. Dozens. Maybe hundreds. But this one was in his life now. And he would not let her become another statistic stamped with polite lies. The night air hummed with a strange tension as Shaq walked through the shelter's hallway. Zariah's drawing still folded in his back pocket. His steps were slow, deliberate. Something about that visit to Miss Pennington's had left an itch beneath his skin, a quiet, haunting echo of something unfinished. He passed the common room and spotted Zariah asleep on a worn leather couch, knees curled into her chest like armor. Her backpack sat beside her, slouched and frayed, the zipper half open, the contents inside spilled just enough to catch his eye. A piece of paper stuck out like it didn't belong, creased, yellowed, and torn at the edges. Something about the way it sat there, hidden but not hidden, pulled at him. Shaq crouched slowly and gently tugged the letter free. The paper felt fragile, like it had been folded and unfolded 100 times. The ink was faded, shaky, written in careful block letters, with misspelled words and scattered grammar. Dear Zariah, I hope this gets to you. They said I can't see you, but I draw you every day. I keep praying you got your mama's eyes and not my wrongs. I never meant to be gone. I never got the chance to tell you I love you. I'm sorry I didn't fight harder. Love, Dad R. Shaq's hands stiffened. The name wasn't complete, but the prison was clear. And so was the plea. This wasn't a stranger's letter. This was a father reaching across bars and years and miles of silence, trying to touch a daughter who'd been taught he didn't exist. Zariah stirred. Her eyes fluttered open, and when she saw the letter in his hand, her body tensed like a trap had snapped. I didn't steal it, she said quickly. I just found it in my old stuff. Someone must have sent it. I don't even know who he is. Shaq sat beside her, careful not to push. Have you ever heard the name Roman Delaney? She shook her head. They always told me my dad left. My mom never talked about him. And when she died, nobody said anything. Shaq nodded slowly. He's in Georgia State, serving life. But this, he held up the letter. This doesn't read like a man who forgot about his daughter. Zariah didn't respond. Her eyes had gone distant, protective, like walls rising fast. "Do you want to know the truth?" he asked softly. Her lip trembled for half a second, then steadied. "I want to know why everyone thinks I shouldn't." Shaq folded the letter and slid it gently back into her backpack. He didn't press further, but as he stood to leave, he knew one thing for sure. This wasn't just a broken girl with a broken past. This was a cover-up, a stolen bond, a buried history trying to breathe. And tomorrow he was going to find out exactly who buried it. Can a father's love survive steel bars and silence? The sky was a dull gray when Shaq pulled up to Georgia State Penitentiary. The building itself looked like something out of a long-forgotten war. A mix of rusted fences, cracked stone, and watchtowers that leered like vultures. It wasn't his first time stepping into a prison, but this felt different. This wasn't about mentorship or motivational talks. This was about truth, buried, shackled, forgotten, and possibly still alive. Roman Delaney's name had stayed with him all night, whispering between every hour like a riddle wrapped in guilt. A man locked away for life, reaching out with broken grammar and tender words. A man Zariah had never even been told existed. Shaq walked through the security process with calm, measured patience. Pat-downs, ID scans, the echo of heavy boots on linoleum floors. The warden, a lean white man with tired eyes and a clipped tone, led him to a visiting room without much small talk. Shaq had called in favors. "This visit wasn't on the books yet. You'll have 30 minutes, the warden said. "That's all I need," Shaq replied. Roman entered in a beige jumpsuit, his wrists shackled, flanked by 2 guards. He was smaller than Shaq expected, lean but wiry, eyes sharp under a mop of graying dreadlocks. There was something alert in his posture, like a man who'd taught himself never to flinch. They sat across from each other, silence thick between them for a beat too long. "You're the basketball guy," Roman said finally, voice hoarse but steady. "I'm the guy who found your letter," Shaq corrected. "Zariah's letter." Roman's breath hitched. "You found her?" "She found me." The words settled between them. Roman leaned back slowly, as if trying to remember how to carry hope. "She's okay. She's surviving. She's got questions, and nobody's ever given her answers." Roman looked down at his cuffed hands. "I tried. Wrote dozens of letters. They never told me where she was. Last time I tried visiting rights, they said I wasn't in her best interest. As if being black and behind bars means your love don't count." Shaq didn't interrupt. He wanted Roman to speak, to unravel. "I ain't see her since she was 1, Roman went on. "Tamira, her mom was trying to keep me away at first. We had problems. I was stupid. Got caught in the wrong place at the worst time. Convenience store robbery. I didn't even go in. I was just in the car. But the system didn't care. Public defender was a joke. Witnesses were white. Jury was white. I was a black man in a hoodie standing near a crime. That was enough. You ever appeal? 3 times. Got denied every time. They said I confessed, but I didn't. They twisted my statement. Said I implied knowledge. What I implied was I loved my kid and didn't want to die behind bars. But they chose the rest." Shaq studied him. There was no pity in Roman's voice, just clarity. A man who'd accepted the bars but not the verdict. "You still think of her?" Roman leaned forward. "Come with me." The guard hesitated but gave a nod. Shaq followed Roman down a narrow corridor to the art wing. Inside a corner cell converted to a mini-gallery, Roman gestured to the walls, lined with drawings. Hundreds of them. All of a little girl. Zariah in pigtails. Zariah holding sunflowers. Zariah laughing with a tooth missing. Zariah under the stars. "I've been drawing her since she was born. I only had one picture of her when she was a baby. The rest is just my heart guessing what she might have looked like." Shaq stared in silence. The raw devotion on those walls struck deeper than any confession ever could. "You think I'm guilty?" Roman asked. "I think you're the only person who's kept loving her without expecting anything back," Shaq said. Roman closed his eyes for a second. "I never wanted her to grow up thinking I left. I wanted to tell her I was taken, not by death, by the world." Shaq exhaled. "She's been through hell. They moved her from house to house, called her angry, said she had an attitude. But she's just unbroken. They couldn't shrink her down." Roman smiled faintly. "That's Tamira and her." Shaq hesitated. "You know what happened to her?" Roman's face changed. "They told me it was a fire. Said she was drunk. That she passed out and didn't make it. Shaq looked him in the eye. What if I told you she filed a complaint against her boss, racial harassment, weeks before the fire, and that her employer was the brother of a local judge? Roman froze. You think they covered it up? I think they buried her the way they buried you. And they kept Zariah floating, never letting her land long enough to find her roots. Roman's voice cracked. I need to see her. Shaq nodded. Not yet. Not until she's ready. But I'll tell her the truth. And I'll help you fight this if there's even a thread of a chance. Roman didn't cry. He just pressed his palm to the glass between them and whispered, Tell her I never forgot. Shaq lifted his own hand to match it. She won't forget either. As Shaq walked out of the prison, the air felt different. Not lighter, heavier. He carried something now. A promise. A bond not forged in blood, but in resilience. Zariah wasn't just a girl looking for a dad. She was a child born into a war of silence. And Roman, broken but unwavering, was the first soldier to leave a message from the battlefield. By the time Shaq reached his car, the sky had opened with a light drizzle, as if the clouds had listened in. He looked back once at the gate, then at the road ahead. There were truths to dig up, and no matter how deep they were buried, he was going to bring them to the surface, starting with Zariah's forgotten father. What if love was mistaken for transaction? Shaq stood in the quiet kitchen of the shelter, watching rain streak down the window in silver veins. The storm outside was steady, not violent, but persistent, like the ache that had been building in his chest since the day Zariah's voice first cracked his silence. His hands were wrapped around a mug he hadn't sipped from in 10 minutes. The coffee had gone cold, but he hadn't moved. His thoughts were locked on one line, echoing louder than the thunder. I want to buy a dad. At first it felt like a child's misunderstanding, an innocent misfire of vocabulary. But the more he listened to her, the more he realized it wasn't a mistake. It was philosophy. Survival wrapped in economics. Zariah wasn't confused. She was calculating. Later that morning, he found her sitting cross-legged in the common room, piecing together a cardboard puzzle on the coffee table. The box was missing its lid, the picture long lost, so she was building blind, just matching shapes by instinct. Shaq sat on the edge of the couch. Zariah, he said gently, can we talk? She didn't look up.
You already are.
He smiled at her smart mouth. It reminded him of his mother, sharp, but never cruel. I found the letter. Her hands froze on the puzzle piece. And I went to see Roman, your dad. That got her attention. She lifted her gaze, slowly, carefully, like peeling off a bandage. He told me he's been trying to reach you for years. Said he drew pictures of you every day. Zariah blinked, then looked back at the puzzle. Doesn't mean he's mine. No, it doesn't. But it means he didn't give up. Silence stretched between them. Outside, thunder rumbled, distant now. Shaq leaned forward. Can I ask you something personal? She gave a shrug that meant maybe. That money you carry around. The Ziploc bag. What's it really for? She didn't flinch. To buy a dad. Or a mom. Whoever comes first. That's not how family works, see? Then explain it, she snapped. Explain how they keep giving me to people who hate me. Explain why I have to earn sleep, and smiles and second helpings. Explain why everybody has a price, but I don't get to set mine. Shaq stared at her, heart pounding. I figured it out, she continued, her voice quieter now, but no less raw. Everybody sells something. Teachers sell time. Cops sell safety. Foster homes sell space. Even hugs cost obedience. So why can't I pay someone to stay? He sat back slowly, stunned not by her logic, but by how much sense it made in a world that had sold her scraps and called it love. That's not love, Zariah, he said. She gave a small laugh. Sharp, bitter. Then what is? He hesitated, then said, it's when someone shows up even when there's nothing in it for them. She stared at him hard. You gonna do that? Shaq swallowed. I want to. But can you, she pressed. Can you be mine without me buying it? Without me earning it? Without me fixing myself into whatever shape makes people keep me? Shaq didn't answer right away. Not because he didn't want to, but because her question stripped him bare. I don't know if I can be what you want, he said honestly. But I won't walk away. Zariah tilted her head, skeptical. Promise? She asked. I do, he said. No returns, no refunds. She looked away, back to the puzzle, and whispered, we'll see. Later that day, Shaq met with Danya in her office. The room was cluttered with files, post-its, and half-eaten granola bar. She was on the phone, arguing with someone about a missing case number. Another transfer request, she muttered, hanging up. They want to move a kid to better fit the household dynamic. Translation: the white foster parents want a quieter black child. Shaq shook his head. You ever wonder if the whole thing's just a factory? It is, she replied flatly. Production line for broken hearts. He told her everything Zariah had said. The Ziploc bag, the transaction theory, the logic behind it. Danya leaned back in her chair, sighing. She's not wrong, Shaq. We created that logic. Every placement, every file, every rejection. You don't get to grow up in this system without learning what your love costs to other people. But it shouldn't be like this. No, she agreed. But changing it takes more than good intentions. Shaq sat still for a moment, then asked, "Can I become her guardian?" Danya raised her eyebrows. That's a leap. I'm not asking to be her savior, he said. I just want to stop the bleeding. Paperwork, background checks, home study, there's a mountain between want and legal custody. I'll climb it. She looked at him, finally seeing how serious he was. Then let's start. The following week, Shaq began the process. Interviews, home inspections, legal forms that made love feel like litigation. He didn't tell Zariah yet. He wanted to be sure. But she noticed the change. How he lingered after dinner. How he asked about school. How he taped her drawing to the fridge, like it was worth more than any trophy. One night, as she brushed her teeth in the shelter's bathroom, she caught her reflection and didn't hate it. She couldn't name the feeling. It wasn't happiness. But it wasn't fear either. Later, she slipped the Ziploc bag under Shaq's bedroom door with a note that read, "Return to sender. Deal off." When he found it, he smiled. Not because he'd won, but because she'd stopped trying to buy love. Now maybe she could start believing in it. Some towns decorate their guilt in silence. Shaq parked his SUV at the curb of the county records building, as dusk settled across the town, turning every familiar facade into something new, something ominous. The golden brick of the courthouse glowed under streetlights, innocent in appearance, but for Shaq its polished walls had already begun to drip secrets. He took a slow breath before stepping inside, resolved to peel off layers of a community built on erasure. Zariah's mother, Tamira Wells, had died 2 years ago. According to the official report, she died of a drug overdose in her apartment. The fire that followed was ruled accidental, fueled by candles and paranoia. It all wrapped up in less than a week. A medical examiner's notice, a small funeral, and a local paper's brief obituary. Local mother found dead, no signs of foul play. But that short notice felt more like a book closing than an explanation. Shaq headed to the file room, where dusty folders waited in long rows. He clipped on disposable gloves, like a detective in a crime show, flipping through Tamira's records till he found the health report and police notes. Everything looked neat, clean, untouchable, but the lack of depth told Shaq more than anything else. No toxicology breakdown, no follow-up, no interviews with friends or family, just a declaration that the case was closed. He photocopied everything and carried it out into the parking lot. As he drove back to the shelter, the weight of silence pressed on him. He couldn't let Tamira be buried twice, first in flames, then in forgotten documentation. The next morning, he met Danya at a local cafe near the shelter. The place was buzzing with preteens in sports jerseys and parents chasing lattes. It was a contrast so ordinary it hurt. He laid out the files. Danya flipped through them, brows furrowing deeper with every page. "This is thin," she said, like someone erased who she was before that night. "Exactly," Shaq replied. "There's guilt in this town. Guilt people prefer under wraps." She touched the photo of Tamira tucked in one folder, brown curls, soft eyes, hopeful smile. She never had much, but she deserved more than this. Shaq nodded and explained an anonymous tip he'd received, a voice advising him to talk to an old social worker named Evelyn Cardoza, who'd handled Zariah's case 3 years back. But Evelyn had disappeared from the agency 6 months ago. The tip said, talk to her at the senior center. She's been scared since Tamira died. That afternoon, Shaq walked into the Greenwood Senior Center. It smelled of stale coffee and fading linoleum. Inside, faces looked up from checkers boards and knitting projects. He approached a woman at the far end, a small frame, hunched, hands trembling over a scrapbook. He introduced himself, mentioning Zariah, Tamira, and the unofficial nature of his investigation. Her eyes widened, and she patted the chair next to her. "You're not from here," she said softly. "Correct." She studied him for a moment, then nodded. "I want to help." Over the next hour, Evelyn shared a darker version of Tamira's final days. Tamira had complained of harassment at her workplace, a catering company owned by the judge's brother, someone with power in town. She reported being followed home, receiving threatening calls. She feared the judge's brother. She talked about contacting the media, but Evelyn warned her to be cautious. Then the night of the fire came. The official line claimed Tamira was slumped over in the kitchen, a bottle of booze beside her. But an autopsy from Evelyn's personal notes revealed no alcohol. Toxicology was negative. The medical record was changed. Dashboard cam footage from outside Tamira's apartment complex, collected by a private security company, showed a car circling blocks before the fire broke out. That footage vanished when the fire department claimed it was swept up as part of evidence. Shaq felt a punch to the gut. Who authorized the cover-up? Evelyn whispered. "You're asking exactly the wrong man. People are afraid." She would have named names. She had proof. But she disappeared from paperwork too soon. Evelyn's hands shook as she flipped to a newspaper clipping. Local mother overdoses in apartment blaze. The article had been buried in an obscure part of the paper and quickly archived online. Shaq closed the scrapbook. Tamira was silenced, and Zariah has been left with holes where answers should be. He thanked Evelyn, and left with more than he'd come for. Layers of a system that covered itself with white noise and white lies. On the drive back, he realized that Zariah's fight wasn't just for a father. It was for her mother's name. Her mother's story. Her mother's truth. That evening at the shelter, he found Zariah drawing again. He sat beside her, placing Tamira's picture next to her sketch pad. "This is your mom." Zariah's eyes locked onto the photo. Searching. She whispered, "Mom wasn't a junkie." Shaq nodded. She wasn't. And nobody asked who killed her pride. He handed her a printed security cam still grainy and stark, showing a car outside her mom's building that night. Zariah stared at the license plate numbers. The shape. The shadows. She asked, "What is that?" Shaq said, "A clue." Tears welled up in Zariah's eyes, not from sadness but from recognition. Someone was there. Someone, Shaq echoed. And we'll find out who. For the first time, Zariah didn't hide her anger behind silence. She asked, "Why are they protecting him?" Shaq took her hand gently. "Because they're used to protecting their own. But that ends now." They stayed at the table in quiet determination. Outside, pastel dusk deepened into navy. Inside, a spark wavered into flame. Zariah. That night, Shaq lay awake. The files and the photo sprawled on the desk beside him. He thought of the town, built on white walls and polite faces. A town that protected its own by rewriting history. He thought of Evelyn, elderly and fearful, who trusted him enough to speak. Tomorrow he'd file FOIA requests, contact independent journalists, and pressure the sheriff's department to open a proper investigation. Because no one, not a judge's brother, not a system of silence, would erase Tamira or Zariah again. And every step he took from that moment forward would be in defiance of their precious white lies. The silence in Shaq's study that night wasn't peaceful. It was the kind of silence that comes just before thunder. Papers were spread across the desk in organized chaos. Notes from Evelyn, a copy of the autopsy, a fuzzy screenshot of a car idling outside Tamira Wells' building, and at the center, a typed complaint dated 3 weeks before her death. It had Tamira's name printed neatly on top, followed by a formal accusation of racial discrimination and workplace intimidation. The recipient? Wallace Chambers, CEO of Southern Fork Catering, and brother to the Honorable Judge Henry Chambers. Shaq read the line again, the one that pulled everything into focus. "I have been followed, harassed and threatened with job loss for speaking up about unequal treatment. I do not feel safe. I fear retaliation." That was Tamira's final written statement, and it never reached court. He stared at it. The words burned into his mind. Tamira hadn't overdosed. She hadn't been a victim of her own recklessness. She had been silenced. Systematically, strategically. Her complaint had gone nowhere because Wallace had the clout to bury it. And the night she died, the complaint disappeared from the HR logs, replaced by a whisper campaign that painted her as unstable, drunk, depressed. But the toxicology said otherwise. Shaq leaned back, rage coiling under his skin. This wasn't a coincidence. This was calculated. He sent copies of the complaint and evidence to a civil rights attorney he knew in Atlanta. Then he made a call to a black-run news podcast that specialized in corruption exposure. The voice on the other end didn't ask for more than a headline. Woman files discrimination complaint. 3 weeks later, she's dead. Employer? A judge's brother. Send it, the reporter said. This town's about to hear its echo. Down the hall, Zariah slept soundly for once, unaware of the fire Shaq was about to light in her name. Tomorrow the truth would start crawling back from its grave. Justice has many robes, but not all are clean. The wind howled against the windows of Shaq's truck as he drove toward the town courthouse. The morning sky bruised with early clouds that didn't know yet whether to storm or burn away. In the passenger seat sat a thin folder wrapped in twine, the contents printed, highlighted, and numbered. It was evidence real and dangerous. He'd spent most of the night tying it together. Tamira's complaint against Wallace Chambers, the toxicology reports that didn't match the police narrative, the silent disappearance of a witness file, and Evelyn Cardoza's handwritten case notes. Every piece told a story this town wasn't ready to hear. But Shaq didn't care about readiness anymore. He cared about truth. And Zariah. He parked near the square, walked into the offices of the Georgia Sentinel Weekly, a small but respected black-owned publication that had been battling quiet injustice for decades. Its lead journalist, Corinne Massey, was a relentless woman with a mind sharp as glass, and a pen that bled ink hotter than flame. She had agreed to meet him without fanfare, instructing him to come alone. No cameras, no noise. "You brought it?" she asked, as soon as he stepped into her office. Shaq nodded and handed over the folder. Corinne skimmed it silently, her mouth flattening into a tight line. "You know whose name is on this?" "Yeah," Shaq replied. "Judge Chambers. And his brother, Wallace." Corinne leaned back. "This town's had the same power structure for 30 years. You sure you're ready to crack that?" "I'm not just ready," Shaq said. "I'm done asking for permission." She nodded once, then more firmly. "Then we'll run it. Lead story. I'll assign my team to verify every piece. We'll keep it tight. But this," she tapped the complaint page, "this'll be the earthquake." Shaq didn't stay long. He had no interest in basking in the buildup. He left quietly, heading toward the shelter, the weight in his chest lighter for the first time in days. But as he turned the corner to the lot, his gut clenched. His truck parked where he always left it, leaned awkwardly, sagging toward one side. He slowed down, then saw it. All 4 tires slashed. The cuts were precise, clean, done by someone who wasn't rushing, someone who wanted the message read as clearly as it was carved. "Don't dig deeper." He stood in the lot for a long time, hands in his pockets, wind scraping his face, the town around him going about its day like nothing had happened. He didn't call the cops. He already knew the report would disappear before it hit the database. Instead, he called Danya. "Someone wants me to stop." She was quiet for a beat. "Then you're close." That evening, Shaq gathered the shelter staff for a private meeting. He instructed them to double-check the building's locks, keep Zariah indoors after dark, and alert him if anything felt even slightly off. He didn't share the details, just enough to put everyone on alert. Zariah noticed the change in his mood when he brought her a new sketch pad that night. He didn't smile like usual. His words were clipped, his eyes shadowed. "What happened?" she asked, watching him carefully. "Someone's scared we're gonna find out too much." Zariah nodded slowly. "Good." Shaq laughed. A real laugh, if short-lived. "That's not the lesson." "Sure it is," she replied. "It means they got something to hide." Later that night he sat at his desk again, sorting through emails. That's when one came in from a blocked address. No name. No signature, just 3 lines. "Check the burn record from the coroner's office." The real talk screen was shredded. "Ask about Thomas R." He saw it before it vanished. Shaq stared at the screen, pulse ticking like a metronome. The next morning he made a quiet visit to the coroner's office. It was a beige building with flickering lights and the kind of smell that clung to your clothes long after you left. He asked for burn logs, records of files intentionally destroyed. The clerk was resistant at first, then caved when he flashed a legal escort notice filed by Corinne's team. There it was. File 89721. Wells Tamira. Full records, destroyed on order from administrator. No reason. No attached memo. Just gone. But listed as the person who logged the destruction? Thomas Rieger, a retired tech. Last known address. A trailer off County Road. Shaq drove out that afternoon, passing old farmhouses and rusted mailboxes. He found the trailer tucked into a grove of pine trees, paint peeling, wind chime swaying. Thomas answered the door slowly. A thin man in his 70s with foggy glasses and shaking fingers. "Don't want trouble," he said. "I'm not here for trouble," Shaq replied. "I'm here for truth." Thomas looked into his eyes, then nodded once. "Come inside." The living room was packed with yellowing newspapers and unopened mail. Shaq stood by the window while Thomas poured tap water into mismatched mugs. "I saw the report," Thomas said, without prompting. "Tamira Wells, negative for drugs, no alcohol, clear mind. I remember because I asked the examiner. Then why'd they say overdose? He just said that's what we're calling it. I knew then it was buried." "Did you keep a copy?" Thomas opened a drawer, pulled out a small envelope, and handed it over. "Didn't feel right, letting it vanish. Been waiting for someone to ask." Shaq opened it. The page was faded, slightly stained, but legible. "No narcotics, no alcohol. Cause of death: smoke inhalation during fire of undetermined origin. Not overdose. Not suicide. Murder by omission." "You ever tell anyone?" Shaq asked. Thomas shook his head. "Not until now. People don't ask about black women unless there's a riot." Shaq left with the envelope in his jacket and a storm in his chest. He dropped it at Corin's office without speaking. She read it, eyes wide. "This blows it open." "That's the idea," Shaq said. That night, as Zariah sketched flames on a hilltop, her own way of processing, Shaq sat beside her and said, "You were right. About everything." She didn't smile. She just nodded. "I know." And from that night on, they both understood one thing. This town had told its version of the story for too long. Now they were about to tell the real one. Here is the full 1,100-word script for the 8th section. Sometimes heroes aren't born, they're cornered. The studio lights were unforgiving, hotter than Shaq remembered. He'd been in front of cameras most of his life. But this was different. This wasn't about dunks, endorsements, or entertainment. This was about reckoning, about truth, about a little black girl who believed love had a price tag and a mother who'd been erased by polite lies. He sat in the guest chair on Real America, now a nationally syndicated morning show, with a reach that touched every household from uptown lofts to rural kitchens. The host, Darla Keys, was crisp, quick, and knew how to push for ratings. But Shaq didn't need her to prod. He came to speak. "We're live in 3, 2. The red light blinked. Shaq breathed deep. Darla smiled into the camera. "Joining us this morning is NBA legend, philanthropist, and community leader Shaquille O'Neal. But today, he's not here to talk sports. He's here to talk justice." Shaq nodded slightly. "That's right. What's brought you to the center of what many are calling a potential civil rights case in rural Georgia?" Shaq didn't blink. A girl named Zariah, and a woman named Tamira, her mother, who died not from drugs, not from accident, but from silence. He unwrapped the story on air, carefully but unapologetically. He talked about Tamira's complaint against her employer, Wallace Chambers, about the falsified overdose report, about the judge who wore the same last name as the man she accused, about the missing footage, the altered file, the social worker who kept the truth alive when no one else would. And then he talked about Zariah, how she'd been shuffled through 8 foster homes, each one more interested in obedience than understanding. How she'd carried change in her shoes, not for lunch, but to buy a father. The studio went still. She believed love was a transaction, because the system taught her everything else was. Shaq said, voice steady but loaded. "And that system right now is protecting the men who let her mother die." Darla blinked, unprepared for the weight of it. "Do you have evidence?" "I have a copy of the real toxicology report. I have a whistleblower's statement. I have unanswered questions the local authorities never tried to answer." "Why now?" she asked. "Why speak up now?" Shaq looked into the camera, not just speaking, but reaching. "Because if I don't, who will? If someone with my platform can't say this out loud without flinching, then how does the next black girl survive this town, without disappearing too?" They cut to commercial. The room stayed silent for a long moment. The episode aired that afternoon. Within hours, clips flooded social media. Black activists reshared it with captions like "Shaq just blew the lid off." Civil rights lawyers began tagging news outlets. The video hit 1 million views before nightfall. By morning, the podcast Truth Unplugged had uploaded a full investigative episode titled Zariah's Town, the racism that burned quietly. And the calls started coming in. A state senator from Atlanta promised to push for a review of Tamira's case. A national news anchor requested a sit-down with Shaq. Civil rights groups offered legal aid. Wallace Chambers closed his business for personal safety. Judge Henry Chambers refused to comment, but filed a motion to block the release of public records, only to have it overturned within days. Shaq had expected backlash. He had not expected a tidal wave. But then, just as the momentum hit fever pitch, something happened. Zariah didn't show up for breakfast. The shelter staff assumed she'd slept in, but when they checked her room, it was empty. Her bed untouched, her backpack gone. No note, no clue, nothing. Panic hit like a car crash. Shaq tore through the building, every step louder than the last. He called her phone straight to voicemail. He checked the security cams. One angle caught her leaving just after 5 a.m., hoodie up, head low, alone. Dunya arrived within 30 minutes. "We need to alert the authorities." "No," Shaq said sharply. "We alert the press first." "Shaq, she doesn't trust the system. If someone took her, they won't find her through official channels." "Then what are you thinking?" "I'm thinking someone got scared. Scared of what she knows. Scared of what she might say." Danya's eyes hardened. The judge? Or someone doing his cleanup? They began calling every contact. Civil rights attorneys, journalists, activists. Within an hour, a hashtag began trending. "Where is Zariah?" The community lit up. Protesters gathered outside the courthouse. A student-led vigil formed outside the shelter. And Shaq, calm, composed, terrifyingly focused, hit every news camera he could find. "If anything happens to her," he said in one viral clip, "the people who've been silent for decades will have blood on their hands." And then, quietly, an anonymous tip came through to Corin Massey's inbox. "She's being held under CPS protective relocation, ordered at a state level." Someone claimed Shaq's involvement was becoming a security threat. Dunya read it twice, her mouth tightening. "They're using the system to hide her. They're treating her like evidence," Shaq said. The next move came fast. He filed an emergency injunction through the Atlanta court system to demand her location. Corin's team leaked the relocation order. The public erupted. Protesters camped out in front of the governor's mansion. Lawyers launched a civil suit. And Shaq, standing at the center of it all, no longer looked like a retired athlete. He looked like a man reborn, not by choice, but by necessity. Because when a town chooses silence, the only response is volume. And Shaq O'Neal, for all his size and history, had never spoken louder than he did when they tried to steal Zariah away. The message from CPS came in cold and clinical, tucked inside a digital file like a bureaucratic apology. "Zariah Wells has been relocated for her safety. Due to elevated media exposure and potential risk to her psychological well-being, she has been placed in a secure care facility under state oversight." Shaq read the statement 3 times, his jaw tightening with each word. There was no name, no caseworker signature, just a stamp from the Georgia Department of Child Services. They hadn't even used her name in the subject line. She was just a minor subject. Dunya stormed into his office, the email pulled up on her tablet. "They're trying to disappear her legally." Shaq stood motionless. "They didn't remove her because she was in danger. They removed her because she's inconvenient." She nodded, voice trembling. "The story's too loud. The judge is sweating. Someone made a call from way above our pay grades." Shaq leaned forward, hands gripping the edge of the desk. "They want to control the narrative, silence the girl who could unravel it all. And they're doing it behind locked doors," Dunya said. "She's not with a family. She's in a state-run youth psych center, one that doesn't allow outside contact." Shaq's next words were not a whisper. "Then we open every door they try to close." The search wasn't over. It was just beginning. When the system steals, where do you look? The shelter felt colder without Zariah. Her absence didn't echo. It hummed, low and constant, like a song only pain could hear. Shaq stood by her empty chair that morning, a coffee in one hand and a silence in the other. What do you do when a system with no fingerprint steals a child in plain sight? You make noise, and you keep making it. By noon, Shaq had posted a video from the shelter's common room, his voice firm and unblinking as he spoke directly to the camera. Zariah Wells was taken under the guise of safety. But safety doesn't come without a phone call, without contact, without proof. This wasn't a rescue, this was a removal. And we want answers. He didn't yell, he didn't threaten, but the weight in his voice cracked open the internet. Within hours, the hashtag #BringBackZariah surged again, trending nationwide. News outlets picked up the thread. State kidnaps child after whistleblower evidence emerges. One headline read, protesters return to the courthouse steps. Artists painted Zariah's face on brick walls. College students staged sit-ins on behalf of a girl they'd never met, but already mourned like family. Civil rights attorneys stepped up too. One firm in Atlanta filed an emergency motion demanding the Georgia Department of Child Services release Zariah's location under the Protection of Minor Act, arguing that public outcry, not privacy, had driven her disappearance. Still, the state pushed back with cold efficiency. She is under protection, the spokesperson said at a press conference, due to high-profile threats and to prevent undue influence by external parties. Shaq watched that broadcast with his arms crossed and a fire building in his chest. They mean me, he said to Donya. They're saying you're the threat, she agreed, pacing behind him. But what they really fear, Shaq said, is her voice. Over the next week, Shaq mobilized every resource he had. He went live on podcasts, held roundtables with educators, activists, and trauma therapists. He brought Tamira's story back to the front page and pointed out the chilling pattern. Erase the mother, disappear the daughter. They wanted silence, but he was going to make it deafening. Then, late one night, Corinne Massey from the Sentinel Weekly called. We found her, she said. Shaq sat up. Where? She's not in a psych facility. That was a cover. CPS placed her in a private home near the Alabama border. Unlicensed, off-record, paid in cash through a third-party contractor that's been used in similar cases involving whistleblowers. Shaq's heart pounded. What's the name? Corinne paused. No official name. Just a quiet care home for minors facing media-related trauma. It's run by a woman named Glynis Rhodes. Donya's fingers flew across her tablet, pulling up a search. Glynis Rhodes used to run a Christian restorative school for troubled girls, Donya said. Shut down in 2013 after multiple abuse claims. Not criminally charged, but the place was buried. Shaq's voice dropped. And now she's babysitting Zariah. Corinne confirmed it. The address is remote. No signage. No neighbors for a mile. She's kept away from phones and online access. They're calling it protection. It's a quiet form of kidnapping, Shaq muttered, wrapped in prayer and policy. He didn't wait for permission. The next morning, he stood on the steps of the Georgia State Capitol, a crowd swelling behind him, microphones jammed in his face. I'm not asking, he said into the cameras. I'm telling. We know where Zariah is. We know how she got there. And we know this entire cover-up has been sanctioned at multiple levels of this government. You cannot silence a child to save a career. The footage aired nationally. That evening, the governor's office issued a statement. We are initiating a formal inquiry into the procedures that led to the placement of minor Zariah Wells. Shaq didn't wait for red tape to tangle things up. He and his legal team filed a court order to retrieve her directly. By Thursday morning, he stood outside the iron gates of the remote property, sheriff's deputies in tow, a document in hand. It had the seal of the state court, and one sentence in bold. Zariah Wells is to be returned to her legal guardian of record, pending review. It wasn't guardianship yet, but it was enough. Glynis Rhodes emerged from the main house, her face pinched with resistance. She's under my care. Not anymore, Shaq said, handing her the order. Step aside. Zariah came out 5 minutes later, hoodie pulled up, face unreadable. When she saw him, she didn't run. She walked, deliberate, tired, cautious. But when she reached him, she didn't say a word. She just leaned into his chest and whispered, "Took you long enough." He laughed once, low and tight, and replied, "Never again." They drove back in silence. No music, no small talk, just the hum of tires and the space between two people trying to believe that what was broken could still be claimed. When they returned to the shelter, staff burst into applause, relief washing over the room like a tide. But Zariah didn't stay long. She went straight to the art room, shut the door, and didn't emerge for an hour. When she did, she handed Shaq a new sketch. It was a cracked glass window, sunlight streaming through. And on the frame she'd written, "Not fixed. Still mine." He pinned it above his bed. Because sometimes, when the system steals, you don't just recover what was taken. You reclaim the right to belong. Here is the full 1,000 word script for the 10th section. Can love reclaim what fear tries to bury? The courtroom wasn't built for people like Zariah. It was built for proceedings, timed, ordered, polished, not for raw truth, not for fire. But that day it held something it wasn't ready for. A black girl, with a spine of steel, and a voice the state had tried to swallow. Shaq stood beside her, his large frame calm, anchored, unshakable. But it was Zariah who owned the room. She didn't flinch under the rows of watchful eyes, the polished shoes, or the click of courtroom pens. Dressed in a navy blazer, with her natural curls unhidden, she stood like she'd grown 5 years in 5 months. The courtroom had been called to hear 2 petitions, one to transfer temporary custody of Zariah Wells to Shaquille O'Neal, and the other, a bombshell filing, was to formally reopen the conviction of Roman Delaney, based on new evidence, suppressed documentation, and false witness statements linked to a coerced plea decades ago. 2 stories, 1 courtroom, 1 broken system exposed at the seams. The judge, a woman new to the bench but unafraid to cut through red tape, called the hearing to order. Shaq sat beside Zariah's legal advocate, with Danya in the row behind him. Roman appeared via video stream from the prison infirmary, his eyes locked on the screen, face thin but determined. Zariah was called first. She stepped forward, the hush in the room growing deeper with every footfall. "Miss Wells," the judge began, "you've lived in over 8 homes and were recently removed by the Department of Child Services without a public hearing. Do you feel safe with Mr. O'Neal?" Zariah nodded. "Yeah." "Do you trust him?" Another nod. "I trust him more than I trust this system." Gasps trickled through the gallery. The judge raised an eyebrow. "Would you like to explain that?" Zariah didn't pause. "I was bounced from house to house like I was bad luggage. They said I had an attitude. They said I was too loud, too stubborn, too black. But no one ever asked why I cried at night, or why I kept coins in my shoes in case I had to run. No one asked about the fire that took my mom. They just kept moving me. Like if they moved me far enough, the truth wouldn't follow." She turned and pointed at the county CPS representative, at the old clerk, at the seated defense lawyer. They were scared I'd speak, and they were right. The courtroom shifted in its seat. No one breathed. "I never needed a dad to tuck me in," Zariah said, her voice steady. "I needed one to believe me when no one else would." She turned to Shaq. "He did." Shaq didn't blink. He couldn't, not with that lump in his throat. The judge sat back, scribbled something on her pad, and nodded. "Thank you, Miss Wells." Then came Roman. The screen flickered once before stabilizing. Roman from behind bars didn't look like a man beaten by time. He looked like a man who had memorized every word of this moment. "I was arrested for a robbery I didn't commit," he began. "I was in the car. I didn't go inside. My lawyer told me to plead out, said I'd get less time, but they threw the book at me anyway." He held up a copy of Tamira's original statement, restored from Evelyn's archive. "My daughter never got a chance to know her mother, and the courts made damn sure she wouldn't know me either." He turned his eyes to the camera, straight into the soul of that room. "I drew her every day. I wrote letters that came back unopened. The system made it easier to lock me away than ask if I mattered. But you don't get to take a child's history and shred it because it's inconvenient." He paused. "Zariah's not asking for a miracle. She's asking for justice. For her mother. For herself. For me." The judge called a recess. The courtroom exhaled all at once, as if everyone had been holding breath they didn't earn the right to keep. Back in the hallway, Shaq crouched beside Zariah on the bench. "You were fire up there," he said. She smiled. "You think they heard me? I think they're still hearing you." An hour later, the court reconvened. The judge returned, robe flowing, expression unreadable. "In the matter of Zariah Wells," she said, "this court recognizes the consistent failure of the state to protect and prioritize her well-being. Temporary guardianship is hereby granted to Mr. Shaquille O'Neal, with full review for permanent status in 30 days pending final evaluation." Applause broke protocol, spilling into the aisles. But it wasn't joy, it was relief. The judge raised a hand. "Additionally, the court is granting a motion to reopen the conviction of Roman Delaney based on new evidence. This case will be reviewed under post-conviction relief statutes, with further hearings to follow." Zariah gripped Shaq's hand like a lifeline. After court, the press surrounded them. Shaq shielded Zariah from the flashbulbs and questions. They made it to the car, drove out of the city, and didn't speak for the first 20 minutes. Then Zariah asked, "What happens now?" Shaq answered slowly. Now we make home. You think they'll let Roman out? I think truth has a longer reach than lies. Zariah looked out the window, the world outside blinking by in fragments. Billboards, trees, signs. Do I get to keep my name? Shaq smiled. You get to define it. Back at the shelter, a celebration waited, quiet but full. Staff clapped, kids cheered. A cake read, Zariah's home. Later that night, she taped a new drawing above Shaq's bed. A house, a fist, a flame, and beneath it, in small steady print, I was always more than a case file. Shaq leaned against the doorframe, hands in his pockets, tears in his eyes. Yeah, he whispered. You were. Here is the full 1,200-word script for the 11th section. The home she wanted wasn't for sale. It was earned. It wasn't a courtroom that sealed the deal. Not the final review. Not the signature on the paperwork. Not even the quiet tear Shaq shed behind his sunglasses outside the courthouse. What made it real was simpler. A breakfast. The first morning Shaq became Zariah's legal guardian. She came downstairs before he could call her. No knocking. No questions. Just walked in. Hoodie half-zipped, curls untamed, barefoot on the kitchen tile. She slid into the stool across from him, grabbed half a waffle from his plate, and said, "We out of syrup." That's what it meant to belong. Shaq just smiled, slid the bottle toward her and said, "Only the fake kind." She shrugged. "Fake's fine. Still sweet." He laughed into his coffee. That's how the becoming started. They didn't talk about adoption. The word felt too clinical, too ceremonial, too much like a contract. What they had wasn't about sealing a document. It was about undoing years of silence. It was about learning how to speak without permission, about occupying space like you owned it. Zariah didn't need another title. She needed a foundation. Shaq gave her the upstairs bedroom. She gave it her own rules, books on the floor, shoes in the closet, posters taped without frames. No one complained. She painted the wall behind her bed, in broad, uneven strokes of purple. When Shaq asked what it meant, she said, "It's just mine." By the end of the week, they had a rhythm. Tuesday night, tacos. Saturday mornings for drawing. Sunday drives with no music. Just road and breeze. And rest. There was no ceremony, just normal. The kind Zariah had never been allowed to keep. And then the letter arrived. It came from the Georgia Court of Appeals, sealed in heavy paper. Shaq opened it with steady hands. Inside, a ruling that overturned Roman Delaney's conviction, citing misconduct, suppressed evidence, and a systemic failure of representation. Roman was going home. When Shaq told Zariah, she didn't react at first, just nodded, eyes fixed on her sketchpad. Then, a long breath later, she said, "So, I got two dads now?" Shaq said, "No. You got one dad and one witness." She smiled for a moment, then looked down. "Do I have to choose?" "No," he said gently. "You get to keep what you fought for." Roman's release was quiet. No news cameras, no speeches, just a gate swinging open. A man stepping into sun for the first time in 2 decades without metal shadows behind him. Shaq waited by the car. Roman walked slow. He carried nothing but a sketchbook. When they drove back to town, they didn't talk much, but the silence wasn't empty. It was full of the things they now shared: loss, survival, and Zariah. They met again at the shelter, the same bench where she first said she wanted to buy a dad. She didn't run to him. She didn't cry. She just stood in front of Roman and said, "You drew me like I was whole." Roman smiled, voice hoarse. "You are." They sat in the garden behind the shelter, 3 chairs in a crooked triangle. Shaq didn't interrupt. He let them talk, and listened, because that's what families do. Not fix, not erase, just witness. Zariah asked Roman about prison. He told her about books, about teaching younger inmates how to read, about writing her letters even when they were returned unopened. She showed him her sketches, dozens now, and asked if he'd ever seen stars from a yard surrounded by fences. He said, "Not real stars, but I dreamed of them." That night, Shaq watched her sleep from the hallway. It wasn't surveillance. It was reverence. The way her arm hung off the bed, the rhythm of her breath, the poster of bell hooks she taped above her desk. There was no weight in the air, no tension around the edges. Only peace. But it was the next week that told him what they'd really built. They visited a local community center to speak with foster teens. Zariah had agreed to speak on her terms. No script, no introductions. Just a chair, a mic, and her truth. When she stepped up to the front, wearing ripped jeans and an oversized tee, she didn't clear her throat or smile. She just said, "They tried to make me feel like a mistake. Like I needed to be quieter, whiter, easier to raise. But I wasn't the problem. The problem was, they didn't know how to handle a black girl who wouldn't shrink." The room went silent. I found home when I stopped asking for permission to exist. And when two people, one inside bars, one outside, showed up for me anyway. Later that night on the drive home, she said, "I think we should call it ours. The house. Not yours. Not mine." Shaq said, "It already is." Roman moved into an apartment a few blocks away. Not because he wasn't welcome, but because healing had to breathe. He visited often. Sometimes just to sit on the porch and drink lemonade. Sometimes to watch Zariah draw. Once to tell her about the day Tamira sang off-key to her in the hospital nursery. She had the worst voice, he laughed. But she sang anyway. Zariah taped his voice and played it back later that night. "Just so I don't forget," she said. They didn't build a perfect home. They built a real one. And every time Zariah walked through the front door, she didn't knock. She didn't ask if it was okay. She belonged. Here is the full 1,200-word script for the 12th and final section. The end was never about money. It was about memory. The porch was quiet in the way a story is quiet after the final line has been read. Still warm, still echoing. The kind of quiet that comes not from emptiness, but from fullness. Shaq sat in a weathered chair, its arms smooth from time, a glass of sweet tea resting on the table beside him. The sun was folding gently into the trees, painting everything gold. Behind him, the screen door creaked open and shut in rhythm, followed by the rise of Zariah's laughter. Light, real, free. He didn't need to turn around to know she was there, dancing barefoot in the yard, her hair catching light like a memory finally allowed to breathe. He leaned back, eyes on the horizon. "You know," he said, voice soft but clear, "the first time she looked me in the eye and said, 'I want to buy a dad,' I thought maybe she just didn't understand what love really was." He paused, sipping his tea. But the truth is, she understood more than most grown folks ever will. She understood the cost of trust, of believing someone will stay. She'd seen the fine print on people's promises, and decided maybe, just maybe, she could skip the disappointment and make it a transaction. He chuckled once, shaking his head. She wanted certainty. Who could blame her? Inside the house, a record played faintly, a song Zariah had found in a thrift store bin. All vinyl crackle and soulful notes. It bled through the windows like comfort. Shaq continued. "She taught me something I didn't know I'd forgotten. That love isn't just showing up. It's showing up without needing a reason, without conditions, without keeping score." His eyes flicked to the garden, where Roman was pulling weeds, moving slow but steady. They hadn't labeled their bond. They didn't need to. The man who drew his daughter from memory was now planting roots in the same soil. Shaq smiled. "When the court granted me guardianship, everyone kept calling it a happy ending. But this wasn't an ending. It was just the next chapter. The chapter where we finally get to breathe. To sleep without our shoes on. To laugh without wondering if someone's measuring the volume." Behind him, Zariah's voice rang out, half sung, half yelled, as she challenged a friend to a foot race down the block. Her joy was loud, unruly, unapologetic. He closed his eyes for a second, and let it wash over him. "I still remember the first time she called me Pops," he said. Didn't ask, didn't check, just said it over her shoulder like it'd always been there. He smiled again, softer this time. She said it like it belonged to both of us. He shifted in his chair, the creak familiar now. "And that's the thing," he went on. "She didn't buy a dad, and I didn't rescue a child. We built something in between all that noise. A space where love didn't have to be perfect. Just honest." His eyes settled on a small painting Zariah had nailed to the porch post weeks ago. A house, crooked on purpose. A sky too purple to be real. And at the center, two figures, one tall, one small. No hands held, but walking in stride. She called it balance, he said. He laughed once more, this time from somewhere deeper. "Kids got more wisdom in her pinky than I had at 30. The streetlights flickered on, and kids began scattering home. The evening settled into its final act. Zariah walked back to the porch, a towel slung over her shoulder, cheeks flushed. "I won," she announced, breathless. Shaq tilted his head. "Against that sprinter kid from the middle school." Left him in the dust, she said, climbing the steps. He raised an eyebrow. Timed it? No need, she said with a smirk. I felt the win. He chuckled, holding the screen door, as she passed inside. As she disappeared down the hall, she called out casual matter of fact, unbreakable. Night pops, and there it was. Not a question, not a request, just a truth, settled in. Shaq turned back to the porch. The world outside had gone quiet again, but inside the house hummed with something solid, something real. He sat down once more, leaned back, and let his breath match the rhythm of the night. No medals, no speeches, just a man, a girl, a house, a name, and a memory that didn't ask to be earned, only lived. What if the next Zariah lives on your block, and no one's listening? Don't let silence write the ending. Lift the stories that were never meant to be told. Stand where others stepped back. Because justice isn't finished, it's waiting for who shows up next. Would you like this adapted into a post-credit message, or a campaign line too?